What if I told you that the Bible we all know might be missing crucial details about the creation, the lives of the patriarchs, and even the laws of God Himself? The Book of Jubilees, preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, claims to fill in the gaps, revealing hidden stories and adding deeper insight into God's divine plan. But here's the thing. This book was banned from most of the Christian world. Why? In today's video, we'll be uncovering the mysterious Book of Jubilees, also known as Little Genesis, and exploring why its 50 chapters were excluded from the mainstream Christian Bible. This ancient text holds lost details about the Genesis narrative, giving us a cosmic perspective on how angels, heavenly time, and hidden commandments were passed down to humanity. But the book didn't just stop there. It even insists that the calendar most of the world follows is wrong, and that time itself was given a sacred structure by God that few follow today. So why was this ancient text rejected by the early church? What secrets does it contain that were deemed too controversial for mainstream Christianity? The Book of Jubilees begins with a retelling of the creation story that we know from Genesis, but it goes far beyond what most Bibles include. According to Jubilees, when God created the world, He didn't just bring life into being. He also set up the very structure of time itself, aligning it with His divine order. This is where the concept of sacred time comes in. Unlike the traditional calendar most of us follow, the Book of Jubilees introduces a precise solar calendar, overseen by heavenly angels, that governs the cosmic cycles of the universe. This isn't just about counting days. This is about living in perfect alignment with God's will. Jubilees claims that humanity was meant to follow this divine calendar, which consists of 364 days, divided into 4 seasons of exactly 91 days each. This structure ensures that sacred days like the Sabbath and festivals always fall on the correct date. It's a perfect system, but it's one that the rest of the world has forgotten. In the Book of Genesis, the story begins with the creation of the earth. But Jubilees gives us an even bigger picture. Before the world was even formed, angels were created on the first day of creation. These angels play a crucial role in the governance of the universe, including the regulation of time and seasons. The Book of Jubilees reveals that these angels were assigned specific duties by God, with some overseeing natural phenomena, like the movements of the heavens, and others serving as messengers and guardians of God's laws. This idea of angels controlling the heavens is something we also see in other ancient texts. But the Book of Jubilees emphasizes how these angelic beings help maintain order in the universe, ensuring that the sun, moon, and stars follow their divine paths. For God ordained that the sun should keep its course according to the divisions of the seasons. Jubilees 2.9. These angels don't just watch over humanity. They control the very fabric of time. And when humans fall out of alignment with God's time, it leads to chaos, a theme that plays a central role throughout the Book of Jubilees. One of the most controversial elements of the Book of Jubilees is its insistence that the world should follow a solar calendar, not the lunar calendar that many ancient cultures, including the Israelites, eventually adopted. According to Jubilees, the solar calendar is the only correct way to measure time because it aligns perfectly with God's divine order. The book explains that the solar year consists of 364 days, divided into 52 perfect weeks. Each season, spring, summer, fall, and winter, contains exactly 13 weeks, or 91 days. This system makes sure that the Sabbath and other sacred festivals are always observed on the correct days each year. This solar calendar is strikingly similar to the Ethiopian calendar, which is still used today by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Ethiopian year is divided into 13 months, 12 months of 30 days, with an additional month called Pagum, consisting of 5 or 6 days to make up the difference. Could it be that the Ethiopian calendar is one of the few modern systems that still reflect the sacred time described in Jubilees? In contrast, the lunar calendar, which was adopted by many cultures in the ancient world, including the Israelites, is seen as a corruption of this divine order. The lunar calendar is irregular, causing the months and festivals to shift over time. And Jubilees warns that this deviation from the solar calendar leads to spiritual disorder. There will be those who will surely make observations of the moon, but they will disturb the seasons and make an abominable day, the Day of Testimony. Jubilees, 1687 for Jubilees. Following the lunar calendar is not just a mistake. It's a form of disobedience to God's will. The book suggests that by returning to the solar calendar, humanity can realign itself with the divine rhythms set in motion at the creation of the world. The Book of Jubilees reaffirms the traditional 6-day creation narrative found in Genesis, but it goes into more detail about the first Sabbath. According to Jubilees, God didn't just rest on the 7th day. He sanctified it as a divine institution, an eternal law that was given to both humans and angels. The Sabbath is seen as the foundation of time, a day that was set apart at the beginning of creation and meant to be observed forever. This idea of the Sabbath as a cosmic principle is critical in Jubilees. Not only does it govern the weekly cycle, but it also ties into the larger structure of time, including the Jubilee cycles of 49 years. These cycles are meant to bring the world back into harmony with God's order, offering a period of rest, release, and renewal for the land, the people, and even the angelic realm. For he sanctified the 7th day and blessed it for all times as a sign of holiness for all his works. Jubilees 2:1. The emphasis on the Sabbath as an eternal law shows how Jubilees is not just retelling the Genesis story, it's revealing the hidden significance behind the cycles of time that govern all of creation. The Book of Jubilees tells us that Adam was created on the 6th day, just as described in Genesis. But it adds a new layer to his story. According to Jubilees, after creating Adam, God gave him specific commandments right from the beginning, laws that included the observance of the Sabbath, purity laws, and the rules concerning marriage and worship. These laws, delivered by angels, were to be followed by Adam and his descendants as part of the covenant God made with humanity. While Genesis mentions God's direct interactions with Adam, Jubilees introduces angelic beings as mediators who teach Adam how to follow God's commandments. These angels, particularly those known as the angels of the presence, ensure that Adam and Eve understand the laws of holiness, sacrifice, and moral conduct. And on the 6th day of the 2nd week, we brought, according to the word of God, to Adam all the beasts, and all the cattle, and all the birds, and everything that moves on the earth, and everything that moves in the water, according to their kinds, and according to their kinds, the beasts on the 1st day, and the cattle on the 2nd day, and the birds on the 3rd day, and everything that moves on the earth on the 4th day, and whatever moves in the water on the 5th day. Jubilees 3:1-2. This angelic interaction was meant to reinforce the idea that God's law is not just a human invention, but part of the heavenly order. The angels taught Adam that he must observe God's laws as an eternal covenant, just as they observe the same laws in the heavenly realm. Could it be that God's laws, passed down through angels, were given to humanity long before Moses received the Ten Commandments? And what might we learn from these ancient laws? If you're curious about the laws God gave to Adam and how they compare to the laws of Moses, let us know in the comments. Should we dive deeper into the ancient commandments passed down from the earliest days of creation? After the fall of Adam and Eve, Jubilees adds new insight into the story of their children, Cain and Abel. While Genesis tells us that Cain killed Abel, the book of Jubilees provides additional details about the events that followed. Cain's murder of Abel is seen as the first major breach of God's law, a sin that leads to spiritual consequences for all of humanity. But while Cain is cast out, Jubilees emphasizes that the righteous line of humanity continues through Seth, Adam's third son. In Jubilees, Seth is portrayed as a figure of righteousness, who is taught to follow the laws handed down by the angels. This sets the stage for the later descendants, including Noah, to continue the covenant with God. The story of Noah and the flood is well known from Genesis, but the book of Jubilees offers additional revelations about what happened before and after the great flood. In Jubilees, the focus is not just on Noah's survival, but on the covenant God establishes with him afterward, a covenant that emphasizes the importance of purity, righteousness, and observing God's laws. Before the flood, Jubilees delves deeper into the corruption of the earth, particularly focusing on the Nephilim, the offspring of fallen angels and human women. While Genesis 1 through 4 briefly mentions the Nephilim, Jubilees provides more context, showing how these giants contributed to the wickedness that led God to cleanse the earth with the flood, and lawlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way, like men and cattle and beasts and birds and everything that walks on the earth. All of them corrupted their ways and their orders, and they began to devour each other. Jubilees 5:2. This moral decay was not just due to human sin, but also due to the influence of fallen angels, who introduced forbidden knowledge and corrupted the natural order. God's response is swift. He sends the flood to wipe out this corruption. But he preserves Noah and his family because of their righteousness after the flood. Jubilees reveals that God didn't just promise never to flood the earth again. He also established a new covenant with Noah that included specific laws of purity and sacrifice. These laws, which were later passed down to the Israelites, were intended to help humanity maintain holiness and avoid the corruption that led to the flood. One key detail in Jubilees is that Noah was instructed to observe the Sabbath and follow the same laws given to Adam about sacrifice and purity. This covenant marked a new beginning for humanity, but it also emphasized the importance of remaining obedient to God's laws to prevent further judgment. The laws of sacrifice, which would later be formalized in the Mosaic Law, were already being followed by Noah as part of this covenant. These laws included instructions on how to offer burnt offerings to God and how to remain pure in both body and spirit. In Genesis 12, we are introduced to Abraham when God calls him to leave his homeland and go to Canaan. But Jubilees takes us further back into Abraham's youth, adding an entirely new dimension to his story. According to Jubilees, Abraham grew up in a family steeped in idolatry. His father, Terah, worshipped false gods. This isn't mentioned in Genesis, but Jubilees paints a vivid picture of a young Abraham who rejects the pagan practices around him, choosing instead to follow the one true God. And he said, "My father, tell me, what is this idol you worship?" And Abraham saw that it was an image of stone. And Abraham burned them before the eyes of all and fled into the wilderness. Jubilees 11:16-17. While Genesis focuses on Abraham's obedience to God's call to leave his home, Jubilees portrays Abraham as a revolutionary figure, destroying the idols in his father's house and making a bold stand against the idolatry of his time. This act of spiritual rebellion sets the stage for Abraham's later role as the father of the chosen people, who would reject pagan practices and follow the laws of God. One of the most striking differences between Genesis and the book of Jubilees is the idea that Abraham followed divine laws long before Moses was ever born. In Genesis, there's no mention of Abraham being given laws other than the covenant of circumcision in Genesis 17. However, in Jubilees, Abraham is presented as someone who already observed the Sabbath, made sacrifices, and followed other laws that are typically associated with Moses. According to Jubilees, these laws were not invented during the time of Moses. They were passed down from the angels to the patriarchs. Beginning with Adam, Abraham received these commandments from angels, and he was expected to follow them as part of his covenant relationship with God. And he was taught by the angels concerning the things written in the tablets of heaven. Unlike Genesis, where Abraham's actions are seen as part of his personal faith journey, Jubilees presents him as someone who was part of a cosmic plan. He's guided by angels, and the laws he follows are part of a divine order that governs both heaven and earth. These laws include the Sabbath and various purity laws that Moses would later formalize. The covenant of circumcision is one of the most important moments in Abraham's story. In Genesis 17, God tells Abraham to circumcise himself and all the males in his household as a sign of the covenant. But Jubilees goes even further, revealing that this was not just a symbolic act. It was part of a cosmic law written on the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, circumcision wasn't just a sign for Abraham's descendants. It was a divine law that had been in existence since the creation of the world. This covenant was inscribed on the heavenly tablets, which are seen as God's blueprint for creation, containing all the laws that govern both angels and humans. And this law is for all the generations forever. And there is no circumcision of the days, and no passing over one day out of the 8 days. For it is an eternal ordinance, ordained and written on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 15:25. In Genesis, the focus is on Abraham's obedience to God's command. But Jubilees portrays this act as part of a much larger divine order. Circumcision is not just a physical sign. It's a way of aligning oneself with the cosmic laws that govern the universe. The story of the binding of Isaac, known as the Akkad, is one of the most powerful moments in Genesis. Genesis 22:1-19, where God tests Abraham's faith by asking him to sacrifice his son, Isaac. Jubilees retells this story, but with some extra layers. In Jubilees, the test is not just between Abraham and God. It's also a part of a larger spiritual warfare. According to Jubilees, the angel Mastema, a figure often associated with Satan, is the one who suggests this test to God, hoping that Abraham will fail. Mastema represents the forces of evil, constantly seeking to undermine the righteous. The book of Jubilees adds that angels intervened during the binding, and God allowed the test to show that Abraham's faith was greater than the temptations of evil. And I stood before him, and before the prince of the Mastema. And the Lord said, Command him not to lay his hand on the lad, nor to do anything to him, for I have shown that he fears the Lord. Jubilees 18:10. This story in Jubilees introduces a whole new level of spiritual significance. It's not just a test of Abraham's obedience. It's part of the cosmic battle between good and evil. Mastema tries to lead Abraham into failure, but God's intervention shows that faithfulness will always triumph over evil. In Genesis, the story focuses on Abraham's personal test, but in Jubilees, it's part of a larger spiritual narrative that involves angelic forces and the struggle between good and evil. In Genesis 25:23, we are told that before Jacob and Esau were even born, God revealed to their mother Rebekah that the two brothers would become the heads of two nations, and that the older Esau would serve the younger Jacob. Jubilees expands on this prophecy, emphasizing that this wasn't just a family feud. It was part of a cosmic design in which Jacob was always meant to inherit the blessing and continue the line of righteousness that started with Abraham. Jubilees adds a layer of predestination, revealing that Jacob was chosen from birth to carry on the covenant, while Esau was destined to stray from God's plan. The book even notes that Isaac and Rebekah were given divine knowledge about Esau's rebellious nature and his future descendants' opposition to Israel. In Genesis, we see this struggle unfold through Jacob's cunning and Esau's impulsiveness. But Jubilees explains that Jacob was always meant to inherit the birthright, and that his actions, although deceptive, were part of fulfilling a divine plan. One of the key differences in Jubilees is the portrayal of Esau as more than just a brother who loses his birthright. Jubilees emphasizes that Esau represents a line of rebellion against God's chosen people. His descendants, the Edomites, are portrayed as a nation that will rise in opposition to Israel, fulfilling the prophecy that the elder will serve the younger. While Genesis mentions the hostility between Esau and Jacob after the birthright and blessing incidents, Jubilees expands on this theme, showing how Esau's descendants would become a nation that directly opposes Jacob's line, the future Israelites. This is part of the larger cosmic conflict that Jubilees often emphasizes: the struggle between righteousness, Jacob, and rebellion, Esau. And Esau took his wives and his sons and all that he had, and he went up to the hill country of Seir and lived there. And Esau became a nation, and they oppressed Jacob's descendants. Jubilees 37:1, Genesis reference, Genesis 36:8. So Esau, that is, Edom, settled in the hill country of Seir. Jubilees makes it clear that Esau's rebellion was not just personal, but national. His descendants would become the Edomites, who would go on to have numerous conflicts with the Israelites, reflecting the spiritual battle that began with their forefathers. One of the most significant moments in Jacob's life is when he receives the blessing from his father Isaac. In Genesis, this blessing ensures that Jacob becomes the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Genesis 27. But Jubilees goes even further, emphasizing that Jacob was given not just a blessing, but also a continuation of the divine laws that had been passed down from Abraham. According to Jubilees, after Jacob receives the blessing, God and the angels reveal to him the laws that he and his descendants must follow. These include the observance of the Sabbath, purity laws, and the sacred calendar, laws that would later become formalized in the Mosaic Law. Jacob is portrayed as the keeper of these laws, tasked with ensuring that his descendants, the future Israelites, follow them as part of their covenant relationship with God. And the Lord appeared to him by night, and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land whereon you are sleeping I give to you, and your seed shall be as the stars of heaven. Jubilees 27:23 Genesis reference. Genesis 28:12-15. The vision of the ladder and God's promise to Jacob. In Jubilees, the laws that Jacob receives are part of the cosmic order that governs both the heaven and earth. This emphasis on Jacob as the inheritor of divine law elevates his role beyond just receiving a birthright. He becomes the custodian of God's eternal commandments, linking him to the heavenly tablets mentioned earlier in Jubilees. Jubilees doesn't just stop at the rivalry between Jacob and Esau. It expands this conflict into a prophetic vision of the ongoing struggle between their descendants. The book suggests that the nations that arise from Esau will continually oppose Jacob's descendants, the Israelites, throughout history. This goes beyond the personal feud between two brothers and ties into the idea of a spiritual battle between righteousness, Jacob Israel, and rebellion, Esau Edom. In Jubilees, this prophetic struggle is not just about territorial conflict. It's part of the greater cosmic war between the forces of good and evil. Esau's line represents nations that will become enemies of God's chosen people, and this tension continues throughout biblical history. This spiritual opposition between Israel and the descendants of Esau plays a key role in Jubilees' apocalyptic vision, linking the conflict to the end times. And Jacob and his sons came down into Egypt to Joseph, and Esau's sons remained in the land of Edom. And from that day, the enmity between the nations remained. Jubilees 45:3 Genesis reference, Genesis 33:16. So, that day Esau started on his way back to Jerusalem. This vision of an ongoing spiritual struggle reflects the broader themes of Jubilees, where the story of the patriarchs is part of a larger cosmic plan, one that involves not just the family of Abraham, but the destinies of nations and the ultimate battle between good and evil. In Genesis, we see the birth of Jacob's 12 sons through his wives, Leah and Rachel, and their maidservants. These 12 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin, become the heads of the tribes of Israel. However, Jubilees adds a layer of divine order to the birth of these sons, showing that their births were not just the result of human relationships, but part of a predetermined plan set by God. According to Jubilees, the timing and sequence of the births were ordained by God to align with the sacred calendar. The book emphasizes that each son was born according to the divine schedule, making their births part of the larger cosmic plan. And Jacob's wives and maidservants gave birth to his 12 sons, each according to the time set by the Lord, and their destinies were written on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 28:12. Genesis reference, Genesis 29:31-30-34. The birth of Jacob's sons. While Genesis focuses on the narrative events surrounding the births of these sons, Jubilees stresses that their births had been written in the heavenly tablets, reinforcing the idea that the 12 tribes were part of God's predestined plan for the world. One of the significant moments in Genesis is the story of Reuben, Jacob's eldest son, who loses his status as the firstborn after committing a grave sin. Genesis 35:22. Jubilees expands on this event, emphasizing its spiritual consequences and explaining why Judah and Levi rise to prominence in his place. In Jubilees, Reuben's sin is framed as a violation of the divine laws that had been established long before. His actions are not just seen as a personal failing, but as a spiritual transgression that disqualifies him from leading the tribes. This allows for Judah, the fourth-born, to emerge as the tribal leader, and Levi to take on the role of priesthood, which is part of the divine order set by God. Because of his sin, the firstborn Reuben was not reckoned in the inheritance, but Judah was chosen as the prince over his brothers and Levi for the priesthood forever. Jubilees 33:10 Genesis reference, Genesis 49. 34 Reuben disqualified due to his sin. While Genesis mentions Reuben's disqualification, Jubilees places a much stronger emphasis on how this event aligns with the cosmic plan. Judah's rise is part of God's eternal law, and Levi is set apart for the priesthood, connecting their destinies to the larger spiritual framework that governs Israel's future. In the Bible, the tribe of Levi is set apart for the priesthood, with Moses and Aaron descending from this tribe. Exodus 28. But in Jubilees, the role of Levi as the priestly tribe is framed as part of an eternal mandate. The book emphasizes that Levi's priesthood was not just a matter of tribal duty. It was established in the heavenly tablets long before the Levitical priesthood was formalized under Moses. According to Jubilees, Levi was chosen by God to be the spiritual leader of the tribes, responsible for ensuring that the divine laws were observed. His priestly role is described as part of the cosmic order, and he is given special responsibilities that connect heaven and earth, and Levi was set apart for the priesthood forever, to offer sacrifices and to mediate between the people and the Lord. For it was ordained on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 32:17 Genesis reference. Exodus 28 Levi's descendants set apart as priests, while Genesis and Exodus focus on the Levitical priesthood during Moses' time. Jubilees emphasizes that Levi's role was part of God's plan from the very beginning. This makes Levi's priesthood not just a response to historical circumstances, but an essential part of the cosmic order that predates the events at Mount Sinai. In Genesis, the 12 sons of Jacob go on to become the heads of the 12 tribes, and we see their journeys unfold as they eventually settle in the Promised Land. But in Jubilees, the tribes are not just inheritors of land. They are portrayed as guardians of God's law, tasked with upholding the divine commandments passed down from Abraham and Isaac. According to Jubilees, each tribe carries a specific spiritual responsibility and is expected to follow the laws written on the heavenly tablets. The book emphasizes that the 12 tribes were chosen not just to inherit the land, but to serve as stewards of God's commandments, ensuring that God's laws are observed by all generations. And the Lord said unto Jacob, These are the laws for your sons and their descendants forever, written on the heavenly tablets, that they may walk in them and live. While Genesis tells us that Jacob's sons became the heads of tribes, Jubilees adds that they were also entrusted with ensuring that the laws of God were passed down to future generations. Each tribe plays a cosmic role in preserving the divine order, connecting their actions to the spiritual destiny of Israel. In Genesis, Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery, motivated by jealousy over their father's favoritism. Genesis 37. However, Jubilees takes this event and frames it in terms of cosmic consequences. According to Jubilees, the brothers' act of betrayal is not just a family dispute, it's a serious transgression against the divine order, and their guilt extends far beyond what is depicted in Genesis. In Jubilees, the act of selling Joseph is described as a great sin against God's heavenly law, and the brothers are warned that they will face divine punishment for their actions unless they repent. This is a key difference from Genesis, where the focus is more on the brothers' personal jealousy and guilt. In Jubilees, the brothers' actions have cosmic implications. Their betrayal disrupts the divine plan and places them under God's judgment. And his brothers sold Joseph into slavery, and their sin was recorded on the heavenly tablets, for they had transgressed the eternal laws. And it was decreed that their descendants would suffer until they repented for their great sin. Jubilees 34:9. This emphasis on the heavenly tablets makes their sin part of a larger cosmic order, linking the brothers' actions to the future suffering of Israel under Egyptian bondage. Their betrayal sets the stage for God's plan to redeem the nation through the Exodus, which was foretold in the heavenly realm. In Genesis, Joseph's rise to power in Egypt is portrayed as a result of his wisdom and ability to interpret dreams. Genesis 41. However, Jubilees expands on this by explaining that Joseph's rise was part of a divine plan written on the heavenly tablets. His success in Egypt wasn't just because of his abilities. It was because God had preordained his role as a savior for the Israelites. Jubilees emphasizes that Joseph's rise to power was part of the heavenly design, intended to create the circumstances that would lead to the Exodus. It was Joseph's destiny to bring his family to Egypt, where they would eventually become enslaved and then delivered through God's miraculous intervention. And it was written on the heavenly tablets that Joseph would rule over Egypt, and through him, the sons of Israel would be saved from famine. But they would also be bound in Egypt for a time. Jubilees 42:2. In this way, Joseph's life is portrayed as a cosmic event, with his rise to power serving a much larger purpose in God's plan for Israel's deliverance. Jubilees connects Joseph's success directly to the heavenly order, showing that it wasn't just a stroke of luck or human ability. It was foreordained. One of the most intriguing additions in Jubilees is the involvement of angels in Joseph's life. While Genesis portrays Joseph as having a close relationship with God through his dreams, Jubilees goes further by introducing the role of angels in guiding and protecting Joseph throughout his journey. Jubilees describes how angels were sent by God to watch over Joseph from the moment he was sold into slavery, ensuring that he would fulfill his destiny in Egypt. These angels intervened at key moments in Joseph's life, protecting him from harm and ensuring that he remained faithful to God. And the Lord sent his angels to guard Joseph on his journey to Egypt, that he might not perish, for his life was precious in the eyes of the Lord, and his path had been written in the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 34:21. This detail about the angels' involvement adds a layer of spiritual protection to Joseph's story that isn't present in Genesis. It shows that Joseph's journey wasn't just a series of fortunate events. His path was carefully orchestrated by God, with angels ensuring that he would rise to power and eventually save his family. One of the most significant differences between Genesis and Jubilees is how Joseph's life is connected to the Exodus. In Genesis, Joseph's role ends with his family settling in Egypt, but in Jubilees, his life is portrayed as prophetic, foreshadowing the enslavement and eventual deliverance of the Israelites. According to Jubilees, Joseph's rise to power in Egypt was not just about saving his family from famine. It was also about fulfilling a prophecy that would lead to the Exodus. Jubilees explains that Joseph was aware of the future bondage of his descendants and that he played a role in preparing them for their eventual deliverance. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I will die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Fear not, for these things have been written and sealed on the heavenly tablets." Jubilees 46:9. This prophetic element isn't as prominent in Genesis, where Joseph's death is portrayed as the end of his story. In Jubilees, however, Joseph's death is seen as a transition, the beginning of Israel's enslavement, but also a prophetic promise that they would eventually be delivered from Egypt. This ties Joseph's life directly into the cosmic plan of redemption, which would be fulfilled through the Exodus. In the book of Genesis, Israel's enslavement begins when a new Pharaoh comes to power, who does not know Joseph and begins to oppress the Israelites. Exodus 1:8-14. But in Jubilees, this period of enslavement is seen as part of a cosmic prophecy that had already been written in the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, God had already foretold the bondage of Israel long before it happened, and it was part of his plan to lead them toward the Exodus and the giving of the Mosaic Law. This prophetic plan connects directly to Joseph's role in bringing Israel to Egypt in the first place. While Joseph saved Israel from famine, their time in Egypt was predestined to end in enslavement, which would ultimately demonstrate God's power in delivering his people. And it was written on the heavenly tablets that they would be oppressed in Egypt and that God would bring them out with great power and wonders, so that his name would be glorified. Jubilees 48:1. This makes Israel's time in Egypt not just a matter of historical events, but part of a larger spiritual narrative where their enslavement and eventual exodus were preordained for God's glory. The suffering of the Israelites is framed as a necessary trial that would prepare them to receive the laws given at Mount Sinai. In Exodus, we see God acting directly to bring about the plagues and deliver Israel from Pharaoh's oppression. Exodus 7:12. However, Jubilees adds a layer of spiritual warfare to the story, introducing angels as key players in the conflict between God and Pharaoh. According to Jubilees, the oppression of Israel was part of a spiritual battle between the forces of good and evil. Mastema, a figure often associated with Satan, is portrayed as actively working to harden Pharaoh's heart and increase Israel's suffering. Mastema and his evil spirits are said to have encouraged the Egyptians to oppress Israel even more harshly, testing their faithfulness to God. And the prince of the Mastema stood against them, and he sought to destroy them with hard bondage, and to cause them to forsake their faith in the Lord. Jubilees 48:9. In this way, Jubilees adds a cosmic dimension to the story of Israel's enslavement, showing that it wasn't just a matter of political power. Spiritual forces were at work, trying to undermine God's plan for Israel's deliverance. The plagues of Egypt are not only acts of divine judgment, but part of a larger cosmic battle, with Mastema trying to prevent Israel's exodus. In Jubilees, the heavenly tablets play a central role in explaining how the laws and the timing of the exodus were part of God's eternal plan. According to Jubilees, the exodus wasn't just a reaction to Israel's suffering. It had been carefully timed and preordained according to the divine calendar written on the heavenly tablets. The book emphasizes that the timing of the exodus was connected to the observance of sacred laws, and that Israel's deliverance was meant to bring them into alignment with the divine order. Jubilees explains that Israel's time in Egypt, their suffering, and the moment of their deliverance were all predetermined, and God's actions were in perfect harmony with the cosmic timeline. And it was written on the heavenly tablets that on the 14th day of the first month at the appointed time, God would bring Israel out of Egypt, for this was the day set apart from the beginning of creation. Jubilees 49:1. This detail is unique to Jubilees. While Exodus focuses on the events leading up to and during the plagues, Jubilees introduces the idea that the timing of the Exodus was part of a predetermined calendar tied to the cosmic laws of the universe. This makes the Exodus more than just a historical event. It's part of the spiritual fabric of creation. The 10 plagues in Exodus 7 through 12, are a dramatic display of God's power, sent to force Pharaoh to release the Israelites. In Jubilees, however, the plagues are given cosmic significance. They are not only divine punishments, but also symbolic acts that represent the defeat of Egypt's gods and the spiritual forces behind them. Jubilees explains that each plague was aimed at disempowering the false gods of Egypt, demonstrating that only the God of Israel had true power over heaven and earth. Each plague was a strike, not just against Pharaoh, but against the spiritual rulers of Egypt, undermining the forces of darkness that sought to keep Israel enslaved. And the Lord sent the plagues upon Egypt, not only to judge Pharaoh, but to show that the gods of Egypt were nothing before him, for they were false powers, unable to stand before the Almighty. In this view, the plagues are part of the larger cosmic conflict between good and evil, where the God of Israel defeats both the physical and spiritual powers of Egypt. Jubilees also suggests that Mastema and his evil forces were working behind the scenes to prevent Pharaoh from releasing Israel. But God's power overwhelmed them at every turn. In Exodus, we see Moses receive the law directly from God on Mount Sinai. But Jubilees adds the detail that these laws were not created in that moment. They were already inscribed on the heavenly tablets long before Moses' time. According to Jubilees, the heavenly tablets are essentially a cosmic record of all of God's laws, established at the very beginning of creation, and they serve as a guide for both angels and humans. Jubilees emphasizes that Moses was simply the human recipient of laws that had been preordained for all time. The Mosaic Law, therefore, is not just a set of rules for the Israelites. It's part of a divine order that governs the entire universe. This means that the laws given to Moses were always meant to be revealed, and their timing was in accordance with the divine calendar. And the law and the testimony were ordained and written on the heavenly tablets, created even before the foundation of the world, so that they might guide all the generations of the children of Israel. Jubilees 60:17. While Exodus focuses on the dramatic revelation of the law at Sinai, Jubilees presents it as part of a cosmic plan. The laws were already written in heaven, waiting for the right time to be revealed to Moses and the Israelites. One of the most fascinating aspects of Jubilees is its insistence that the Mosaic Law was observed long before Moses. While the traditional Bible portrays Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as righteous individuals, it doesn't specify that they were given the full law. Jubilees, on the other hand, claims that the patriarchs were already observing the Sabbath, performing sacrifices, and following many of the laws that would later be given to Moses. This makes the Mosaic Law not a new development, but a restoration of the laws that had been passed down from the beginning of time. The patriarchs received these commandments through divine revelation and through the angels who guided them. For example, Abraham is described as following the Sabbath and the dietary laws long before they were officially given to Israel. For Abraham kept the Sabbath, circumcised his sons, and followed the commandments of the Lord that were written on the heavenly tablets, and the law was revealed to him through the angels of God. Jubilees 16:28. In this way, Jubilees presents the law as a timeless code given to all the righteous from Adam onward. Moses was simply the one chosen to deliver it in its complete form to the nation of Israel. One of the most unique contributions of Jubilees to the story of the Mosaic Law is its emphasis on the cosmic calendar. In Jubilees, the observance of time, particularly the Sabbath, festivals, and the Jubilee years, is central to the divine order. These laws of timekeeping are presented as part of the heavenly tablets, and following them is seen as a way of aligning with the divine rhythm of the universe. In Jubilees, the solar calendar is emphasized over the lunar calendar, with a year consisting of 364 days. This system is seen as the correct way to observe God's commandments, ensuring that all festivals and Sabbaths fall on their proper days. Jubilees warns that deviating from this divine calendar can lead to spiritual disorder, which is why the laws of timekeeping are so central to the Mosaic Law. And the Lord spoke to Moses and said, "Write down for Israel the law of the Sabbath and the festivals, for these times are ordained on the heavenly tablets, and you must observe them exactly lest you fall into error." Jubilees 52. This focus on the cosmic calendar isn't as prominent in the traditional Bible, where the Sabbath and festivals are mentioned, but without the same emphasis on their cosmic origins. Jubilees stresses that following this calendar is key to remaining in God's favor, as it aligns human life with the divine plan. While the Mosaic Law in the Bible is given specifically to the Israelites, Jubilees presents these laws as eternal, binding not only for Israel, but for all generations and even the angels. The book of Jubilees emphasizes that the laws written on the heavenly tablets are not just temporary guidelines for a single nation. They are eternal commandments that govern both heaven and earth. In Jubilees, the laws given to Moses are meant to be observed by all of God's creation, including the angels, who are portrayed as keeping the Sabbath and observing God's festivals in heaven. This makes the Mosaic Law part of the universal order, extending beyond just humanity and connecting the spiritual realm to the physical realm. And the law that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai is eternal and will be observed in heaven and on earth. The angels keep the Sabbath, and the righteous will observe the commandments forever. Jubilees 5:13. This idea of the eternal law isn't as explicit in the traditional Bible, where the focus is on the covenant between God and Israel. In Jubilees, however, the law is portrayed as part of the fabric of the universe, binding both angels and humans to God's cosmic order. In Jubilees, the future of Israel is not left to chance. It is part of a divinely ordained timeline that has been written on the heavenly tablets since the beginning of time. This timeline outlines the rise and fall of nations, the exile and return of Israel, and the eventual judgment that will come upon the world. Everything that happens in human history, from the creation to the final judgment, follows the cosmic schedule that is recorded in heaven. One of the unique features of Jubilees is its insistence that these events are preordained and that nothing happens outside of God's divine plan. The book provides a prophetic overview of Israel's journey, explaining that their exile, suffering, and restoration were all written in the heavenly records, and they must unfold according to the divine calendar. And all that will come upon Israel was written on the heavenly tablets from their rebellion to their redemption, and the times appointed for their deliverance were fixed long ago. Jubilees 23:32. While Genesis and Exodus focus on specific events in Israel's history, Jubilees provides a broader view, showing that Israel's destiny is part of a larger cosmic plan that has already been determined. Jubilees places a strong emphasis on the role of angels throughout Israel's history, but their involvement becomes even more critical in the end times. In Jubilees, the angels of the Lord are responsible for executing God's judgment on the nations, ensuring that His divine will is carried out both in heaven and on earth. As the end of days approaches, Jubilees describes how angels will descend to separate the righteous from the wicked, gathering those who have remained faithful to God's commandments. The book of Jubilees also introduces the idea that Mastema, the leader of the evil spirits, will be bound and cast into the abyss, symbolizing the ultimate defeat of the forces of darkness. And the Lord will send His angels to gather His chosen, and they shall bind the prince of the evil spirits, casting him into the abyss until the time of judgment, when he shall be destroyed forever. Jubilees 23-29. This portrayal of angels as agents of divine justice adds a unique layer to the end times prophecy. While the traditional Bible speaks of angels in the context of judgment, see Revelation, Jubilees presents a detailed vision of their role in the spiritual warfare that will unfold in the last days. One of the central themes in Jubilees is the prophetic vision of Israel's redemption. The book emphasizes that, despite Israel's rebellion and exile, God has already determined a time when they will be restored to their land and renewed in their covenant with Him. This restoration is not just a political event, it's a spiritual renewal that aligns with the cosmic plan written in the tablets. According to Jubilees, the redemption of Israel will come after a period of great tribulation, during which the nation will be purified. The law will be re-established, and the people will once again walk in holiness, preparing them for the coming of the Messiah and the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. And the time will come when the children of Israel will turn back to the Lord with all their heart, and He will gather them from the nations and establish them in their land, as it was written on the heavenly tablets. While the traditional Bible also speaks of Israel's restoration, see Isaiah and Jeremiah, Jubilees adds the detail that this restoration is part of a predetermined timeline, with specific events already recorded in the heavenly records. In the end times, Jubilees describes the coming of a messianic kingdom, where God's chosen ruler, often interpreted as the Messiah, will establish righteousness on earth. The book of Jubilees emphasizes that this kingdom will mark the end of the current age and the beginning of God's eternal rule, where the law will be upheld and the righteous will inherit the earth. The final judgment in Jubilees involves the separation of the righteous from the wicked, with the wicked being cast into the lake of fire, where they will be destroyed forever. Mastema and his evil spirits will be defeated, and the Messiah will rule in peace and justice. This vision of the end times is consistent with the apocalyptic imagery found in the book of Revelation. But Jubilees adds more emphasis on the role of the law and the cosmic order being restored. And the Lord will establish His kingdom on earth, and the righteous shall rule with Him. For the law shall be written on their hearts, and the wicked shall be cast into the lake of fire. Jubilees 5013. This messianic kingdom in Jubilees reflects a vision of a restored creation, where the law is fully observed and the righteous are rewarded for their faithfulness. The final judgment brings about the ultimate defeat of evil, ushering in an era of eternal peace. If you found value in this deep dive into the Book of Jubilees and its unique cosmic vision of biblical history, be sure to share this video with others who might be interested in exploring these profound mysteries. By sharing, you help us continue uncovering ancient texts and revealing the hidden layers of God's eternal plan. Don't forget to like, subscribe to Deep Bible Stories, and join the conversation in the comments. Together, we can delve even deeper into these fascinating biblical insights.